I'm Mark Gevidoni, a commercial real estate and lending lawyer at Gowling WLG. This video is part of our Real Estate Topics for Lenders series. In this video, we'll be discussing what to review in a commercial lease for a lender. Depending on who the borrower is, a review of a commercial lease involves different considerations and advice to a lender, because the lender will be advancing funds for different purposes and needs to have sufficient security in place in the lease to protect its investment. If lending to a landlord, there should be a fulsome subordination and postponement provision, requiring the tenant to maintain a subordinate position to the landlord and the lender's security and interests. It should have restrictions on the tenant to terminate the lease early, and should have a requirement for the tenant to provide estoppel certificates. The rental obligations should be sufficient for the landlord's investment purposes and the context of the tenancy to the landlord's overall business. For a tenant borrower, the lease should have the ability to assign the lease to its own lender or a corporate affiliate for reorganizations. An ability to offer leasehold security should also be sought. A subordination of the tenant's leasehold interest in favor of the lender is essential, particularly if the lease exists and is registered on title in priority to the lender's security. Without this obligation, the tenant does not have to attorn to the lender or the lender's enforcement of its security and would need to get the tenant's consent to exercise certain remedies. A tenant usually wants a lender to provide a non-disturbance agreement in exchange for this subordination, meaning that the tenant can enjoy the premises without interruption from the lender as long as it is not in default. Estoppel certificates require the tenant to confirm to a lender the state of the lease, the rental payments that have been made, deposits paid, and that there are no disputes or defaults under the lease. Lenders can then rely on these as factually correct representations to assist in future enforcement. The lease should be reviewed in light of the context of the landlord's business. Is this the only tenant of the building, or for the landlord? Or is this one of many in the same building? And how does it relate to the other leases? Are there any gaps in the tenant obligations that would require the landlord to have to expend its own funds? These considerations will impact a lender's decision to lend, but also the type of security to require in order to protect the lender's investments. This presentation was a high-level overview. However, if you find that you have more specific questions about any of the points discussed or their application to a specific fact situation, please reach out to any member of our lending team, and I'm also available through my email.